A cold, late afternoon lucency penetrated the autumn air. The sharp blue shadows of the young trees stretched along the sunny lawn, all in the same direction, as if anxious to see which would be the first to reach the garden's white lateral wall. Far off, across the street, the pistachio facades of apartment houses were very distinct, and there, melancholically, leaning on a red quilt laid on the window-sill, sat a bald little man in shirt-sleeves. The gardener had already twice taken hold of his wheelbarrow, but each time had turned again to the chauffeur. They both lit cigarettes, and the wispy smoke was clearly set off as it floated along the glossy black side of the car. The shadow seemed to have moved just a bit farther, from the sun still bore down triumphantly on the right from behind the corner of the Count's villa, which stood on higher ground with taller trees. Tom walked indolently along the flower bed. From a sense of duty and without the least hope of success, he started after a low-flitting sparrow, and then lay down by the wheelbarrow with his nose on his paws. The very word terrace, how spacious, how cool! The pretty ray of a spider-web stretched obliquely from the corner flower of the balustrade to the table standing beside it. The cloudlets in one part of the pale clean sky had funny curls, and were all alike as on a maritime horizon, all hanging together in a delicate flock. At last, having heard all there was to hear and told all there was to tell, the gardener moved off with his wheelbarrow, turning with geometrical precision at the intersection of gravel paths, and Tom, rising lazily, proceeded to walk after him like a clockwork toy, turning when the gardener turned. Die Toten Seelen, by Russian author, which had long been slipping down Dyer's knee, slid onto the flags of the floor, and he felt too lazy to pick it up. So pleasant, so spacious. That first finish would be no doubt that apple tree over there. The chauffeur got into his seat. It would be interesting to know just what he was thinking about now. This morning his eyes had oddly twinkled. Could it be that his drinks? Wouldn't that be a scream? A tippling chauffeur. 2 men in top hats, diplomats and undertakers, went by. The top hats and black coats floated by along the fence. Out of nowhere came a red admirable butterfly, settled on the edge of the table, opened its wings, and began to fan them slowly as if breathing. The dark brown ground was bruised here and there. The scarlet band had faded. The fringes were frayed, but the creature was still so lovely, so festive. 3. On Monday, Franz splurged. He purchased what the optician assured him was an American article. The rims were of tortoise shell, allowing no doubt for the well-known fact that Shalonians are frequently and variously mocked. When the proper lenses had been inserted and he had donned his new spectacles, Franz experienced at once a feeling of comfort and peace in his heart as well as behind his ears. The haze dissolved. The unruly colors of the universe were confined once more to their official compartments and cells. There still remained one thing he had to do in order to establish and affirm himself in this freshly marked out world. He had to find himself a dwelling place. Franz smiled indulgently and smugly as he recalled Dreyer's promise of the previous day to pay for many luxuries. Uncle Dreyer was somewhat a fantastic but highly useful institution, and Uncle was perfectly right. How indeed could Franz do without some decent clothes? First, however, let us find that room. No sun today. A sober chill emanated from the low, drab sky. Berlin taxis turned out to be a very dark green with a dark black and white checkered border across the doors. Here and there a blue mailbox had been freshly painted in celebration of autumn and looked singularly shiny and sticky. He found the streets of this quarter disappointingly quiet, as actually streets in a great city were not supposed to be. It was fun to memorize their names and the whereabouts of useful shops and offices, pharmacy, grocery, post office, police station. Why did the Dryers insist on living so far from the center? He was displeased that there were so many vacant lots, so many little parks and lawny squares, so many pines and birches, houses under construction, vegetable gardens. It all reminded him too much of his backwoods home. He thought he recognized Tom and a dog being walked by a plump but not uncomely housemaid. Children were playing ball or whipping their tops right on the asphalt. He too had once played like that. Only one thing really told him he was in the metropolis. Some strollers wore marvelous clothes. For instance, +4s, very baggy below the knee, so as to make the wool-stockinged shin look handsomely slender. That particular style he had never seen before, though boys in his hometown also wore knickerbockers. Then there were the high-class frock and a double-breasted jacket, very wide in the shoulders and ultra-tight around the hips, and with incredibly elephantine trouser legs, the tremendous cuffs of which particularly concealed his shoes. The hats, too, were splendid, and the flamboyant ties, and the girls, kind Dryer. He walked slowly, shaking his head, clucking his tongue, looking around at every moment. The kissable cuties, he thought almost aloud, and inhaled with a hiss through clenched teeth. What calves, what bottoms, enough to drive one crazy. At home, when walking along the cloyingly familiar streets, he had experienced, of course, the same aching reaction to fugitive charm many times a day. But in his morbid shyness, he did not dare look too insistently in those days. Here it was a different matter. He was disguised as a stranger, and these girls were accessible. Again that hiss. They were accustomed to avid glances. They welcomed them, and it was possible to accost any one of them and start a brilliant and brutal conversation. He would do just that, but first he had to find room in which to rip off her dress and possess her. 40 to 50 marks, Dreyer had said. That meant 50 at least. Franz decided to act systematically. At the door of every third or fourth house, a small notice board announced rooms for rent. He consulted a newly brought map of the city, checked one again in the distance from Uncle's villa, and found he was close enough. A nice new-looking house with a nice green door, to which a white cart was affixed, attracted him, and he blithely rang the bell. Only after he had pressed it had he noticed the sign said fresh paint, but it was too late. The window opened on his right. A bob-haired, bare-shouldered young girl in a black slip, clutching a white kitten to her breast, peered out at Franz. His lips went dry in an arid blast. The girl was enchanting, a simple little seamstress, no doubt, but enchanting, and let us hope not too expensive. "Whom do you want?" she asked. Franz gulped, smiled foolishly, and said with quite unexpected impudence, by which he himself was at once embarrassed, "Maybe you, eh?" She looked at him with curiosity. "Come on," said Franz awkwardly. "Let me in." The girl turned away and was heard to say to someone in the room, "I don't know what he wants. Better ask him yourself." Over her shoulder appeared the head of a middle-aged man with a pipe between his teeth. Franz tipped his hat, turned on his heel, and walked on. He noticed that he was still grinning horribly and emitting a thin moan. "Nonsense," he thought with rage. "It's nothing. Forget it." It took him 2 hours to inspect 11 rooms in 4 different blocks. Strictly speaking, any one of them was delightful, but each had a tiny defect. One example had not been tidied up yet, and he looked into the dull eyes of the woman in mourning who was answering his questions with a kind of listless despair. Franz decided her husband had just died in that very room, which was rather fraudulently offering him. Another room had a simpler shortcoming. It cost 5 marks more than the price mentioned by Dreyer. Otherwise, it was perfect. The third room revealed brown stains on the walls and a mouse-trap in the corner. The fourth was connected with a smelly toilet that could also be reached from the corridor and was used by a neighbor's family. The fifth, but in a singularly short time, these rooms, with their virtues and flaws, became confused in Franz's mind, and only one remained immaculate and distinct, the one that cost 55 marks. He had a sudden feeling there was no reason to prolong his quest, and that anyway he would not venture to decide himself, fearing to make a bad choice and deprive himself of a million other rooms. On the other hand, it was hard to imagine anything better than the room that had caught his fancy. It gave on a pleasant by-street with a delicatessen shop. A palace-like affair that the landlord said would be a movie house was being built on the corner, and this gave life to his surroundings. A picture of above the bed showed a naked girl leaning forward to wash her breasts by a misty pond. Good, he reflected. It is now 1:45. Time for a meal. A brilliant idea. Eat at the Dryers. I'll ask them what I should pay particular attention to when making my choice, and if he does not think the 5 extra marks, cleverly using his map and promising himself incidentally that as soon as he had taken care of business he would go by subway to what was surely the gayest part of the sprawling city, Franz arrived without difficulty at the villa. It was painted a grainy gray and had a solid, compact, one might even say appetizing look. In the garden heavy red apples hung in clusters on the young trees. As he walked up the crunching path he saw Martha standing on the porch step. She wore a hat and a moleskin coat, and was checking the dubious whiteness of the sky, trying to decide whether or not to open her umbrella. She did not smile when she noticed Franz. "My husband is not at home," she said, fixing him with her beautiful cold eyes. "He is lunching in town today." Franz glanced at the handbag jutting from under her arm, at the artificial purple pansy pinned to the huge collar of her coat, at the stubby umbrella with its sparkling knob, and realized that she too was leaving. "Pardon me for having disturbed you," he said, inwardly cursing his fate. "Oh, it's perfectly all right," said Martha, and they both moved in the direction of the gate. Franz wondered what to do next. Bid her goodbye? Go on walking beside her? Martha was a displeased expression, kept looking straight ahead, her full warm lips half open. Then she quickly wet them and said, "This is so unpleasant. I have to walk. We wrecked the car last night." There had indeed been an unpleasant accident on the way home after a tea and a dance. An ill-timed attempt to pass a truck. The chauffeur had first hit a wooden railing where the tram tracks were being repaired, and swerving sharply had collided with the side of the truck. The Icarus had spun around and crashed into a pole. While this motorized frenzy was in progress, Martha and her husband had assumed all imaginable positions and had finally found themselves on the floor. Dwyer had asked sympathetically if she were not hurt. The shock, the search for the beads of the necklace, the crowd of the gawkers, the vulgar aspect of the smashed car, the full-mouthed truck driver, the arrogant policeman who was not amused by Dwyer's jokes, all this brought Martha to a state of such irritation that she had to take 2 sleeping pills and had slept only 2 hours. "I wonder I did not get killed," she said sullenly. "But even our chauffeur was not hurt, which is a pity." And slowly stretching out her hand, she helped Franz open the wicket, which he was vainly pushing and rattling. "No question about it. Cars are dangerous playthings," he said non-committally. "Now it's definitely time to take leave." Martha noticed and approved his hesitation. "Which way are you going?" she asked, transferring her umbrella from right hand to left. The glasses he had got were very becoming. He looked like the actor Hess in The Hindu Student, a movie. "Don't know myself," said Franz, smirking rather freely. "You see, I was just coming to ask Uncle's advice about the room." This first uncle came out unconvincingly, and he resolved not to repeat it for a while so as to let the word ripen on its twig. "I can help too," said Martha. "Tell me what's the trouble." Imperceptibly they had begun to move and were now walking slowly along the wide sidewalk, on which broken chestnuts and claw-like crisp leaves lay here and there. Franz blew his nose and began telling her about the room. "Why, that's unheard of," Martha interrupted. 55? I'm sure you can haggle a little." A thrill of triumph went through Franz, but he decided not to rush things. "The landlord is a close-fisted old codger. The devil himself would not make him budge." "You know what?" Martha said suddenly. "I would not mind going there and talking to him myself." Franz exulted. What luck! To say nothing how splendid it was to stroll along with this red-lipped beauty in her moleskin coat. The sharp autumn air, the susurration of tires, this was the life. Add a new suit and a flaming tie, and his happiness would be complete. "Where is Mr. Tom today?" he inquired. "I thought I saw him going for a walk." "No, he's locked up in the gardener's shed. He's a good dog, but a little neurotic. As I always say, dogs are acceptable pets if they are clean." "Cats are cleaner," said Franz. "Oh, I abominate cats. Dogs understand when you scold them, but cats are hopeless. No contact with human beings, no gratitude, nothing. We shot lots of stray ones back home, a school friend and I, especially along the river in spring." "There's something wrong with my left heel," said Martha. "I need your support for a moment." She placed 2 light fingers upon his shoulder as she glanced backward and downward. It was nothing. With the tip of her umbrella, she scraped off the dead leaf of her heel had transfixed. They reached the square. At least 2 future stories of the new corner house could be discerned through the scaffolding of the present. Martha pointed with her umbrella. "We know," she said, "the man who works for the partner of the director of the cinema company who is building that house there. It would not be ready till some time next year. The workmen were moving as in a dream." Franz frantically racked his brain for some fruitful theme. "The coincidence. I still can't forget how strangely we met on the train. It's incredible." "Yes, a coincidence," said Martha, thinking her own thoughts. "Listen," she said as they started to climb the staircase of the 5th floor. "I'd rather my husband did not know I helped you. No, there is no mystery here. Simply, I would rather he did not." Franz made a bow. It was no concern of his. Yet he wondered if what she had said were flattering or insulting. Hard to decide. They had now been standing for some time before the door. No one answered the bell. Franz rang again. The door flew open. A little old man with hanging braces and no collar thrust out a rumpled face and let them in silently. "I'm back again," said Franz. "Could I see the room once more?" The old fellow made a kind of rapid salute and shuffled ahead through a long darkish passage. Good heavens, what a squalid hole, thought Martha squeamishly. Was she right in coming here? She imagined her husband's mischievous smile. "You reproached me, and now you're helping him yourself." The room, however, turned out to be reasonably bright and clean. By the left-hand wall stood a wooden, probably creaky bed, a washstand, and a stove. On the right, 2 chairs and a pretentious armchair of moth-eaten plush. There was a small table in the center and a chest of drawers in a corner. Over the bed hung a picture. Puzzled, Franz stared at it. A bare-bosomed slave girl on sale was being leered at by 3 hesitant lechers. It was even more artistic than the bathing September nymph. She must have been in some other room. Yes, of course, in the one with the stench. Martha felt the mattress. It was firm and hard. She took off on gloves, stroked the bed table, and consulted the face of her finger. A fashionable song she liked, Black-Eyed Natasha, came from 2 different radios, on 2 different levels, mingling buoyantly with the musical clanking of construction work somewhere outside. Franz looked hopefully at Martha. She pointed her umbrella at the bearish right-hand wall and inquired in a neutral voice without looking at the old man, "Why did you remove the couch? Obviously you had something there before." "The couch was beginning to sag and is being repaired," answered the old man and cocked his head. "You will put it back later," observed Martha, and raising her eyes she switched on the light for an instant. The old man looked up too. "All right," said Martha again, extended her umbrella. "You furnish sheets, don't you?" "Sheets?" repeated the old man after her with surprise. Then cocking his head to the one side, he pursed his lips, thought for a moment, and replied, "Yes, we can dig up some sheets. And how about service and cleaning?" The old man poked himself in the chest. "I do everything," he said. "I make everything. I alone." Martha went over to the window, looked at the truck with the planks in the street, and then walked back. "And how much was it you wanted?" she asked with indifference. "$55, alertly the man said. "Including electricity and morning coffee? Has the gentleman got a job?" the old man inquired, nodding in the direction of Franz. "Yes," promptly said Franz. "$55 for everything," said the old man. "That is expensive," said Martha. "That is not expensive," said the old man. "That is extremely expensive," said Martha. The old man smiled. "Oh well," shrugged Martha, and turned toward the door. Franz realized that the room was about to float away forever. He squeezed and tortured his hat as he tried to catch Martha's eye. "$55, the old man repeated pensively. "50, said Martha. The old man opened his mouth and closed it again firmly. "Very well," he said at last, "but the lights have to be out by 11. "Naturally," flowed in Franz. "Naturally, I quite understand." "When do you wish to move in?" asked his landlord. "Today, right now," said Franz. "I just have to get my suitcase from the hotel." "But how about a small deposit?" the old man proposed with a subtle smile. The room itself seemed to be smiling. How strange to recall the cluttered attic of his youth, his mother at the Singer machine, while he tried to sleep. How could he have endured it so long? When they emerged again onto the street, there remained his consciousness a warm hollow formed, as it were, by his new room sinking into a soft mass of minor impressions. As she bade him good-bye at the corner, Martha saw the glitter of gratitude behind his glasses, and as she headed for the photo shop with some undeveloped Tyrol snapshots, she recalled the conversation with legitimate pride. A drizzle had set in. The doors of flower shops opened wide to catch the moisture. Now it was really raining. She could not find a taxi. Raindrops were managing to get under her umbrella and wash the powder off her nose. A dull restlessness replaced elation. Both yesterday and today were novel but absurd days, and certain not quite intelligible but significant outlines were showing through confusedly. And like that darkish solution in which mountain views would presently float and grow clear, this rain, this delicate pluvial damp, developed shiny images in her soul. Once again a rain-soaked, ardent, strong, blue-eyed man, a vacational acquaintance of her husband's, took advantage of a cloudburst and Zermatt to bluster her into the recess of a porch and push against her and pant out his passion, his sleepless nights, and she shook her head, and he vanished behind the corner of memory. Once again in her drawing-room, that fool of a painter, a languid rascal with dirty fingernails, glued his lips to her bare neck, and she waited a moment to make out what she felt, and feeling nothing, struck him in the face with her elbow. Once again, and this image was a recent one, a wealthy businessman, an American with bluish-gray hair and a long upper lip, murmured as he played with her hand that certainly she would come to his hotel room, and she smiled and regretted vaguely that he was a foreigner. In the company of these chance phantoms rapidly touching her with cold hands, she reached home, shrugged her shoulders, and cast them aside as casually as she opened her umbrella, which she left on the porch to dry. "I'm an idiot," she said. "What's the matter? What's wrong with me? Why worry? It must happen sooner or later. It's inevitable." Her mood changed again. With pleasure she gave Frida a dressing down, because the dog had somehow got back into the house and tracked dirt on the carpet. She devoured a pile of small sandwiches at tea. She called the garage to find out if Dyer had rented a car, as he had promised. She called the cinema to reserve 2 tickets for the premiere on Friday, then called her husband, then old Miss Hertwig, when it turned out that Dyer would be busy. And Dyer was indeed very busy. He had grown so absorbed in an unexpected offer from another firm, and a series of cautious negotiations and courteous conferences, that for several days he did not remember Franz, or rather he would not remember him at the wrong moments, while relaxing necks deep in warm water, while driving from office to factory, while smoking a cigarette in bed. Franz would appear gesticulating wildly at the wrong telescope end of his mind. Dyer would mentally promise to attend to him soon, and immediately would start thinking about something else. To Franz that was no comfort. When the first agreeable excitement of housewarming had passed, he asked himself what he should do next. Martha had taken down his land landlord's telephone number, but nothing happened after that. He did not dare to phone himself, nor did he dare call on the Dryers without warning, not trusting chance, which last time had so magnificently transfigured his inopportune visit. He must wait. Evidently, sooner or later, he would be summoned, but he did not relish the delay. At 7:30 on the very first morning, the landlord in person brought him a sticky cup of weak coffee, and on a saucer 2 lumps of sugar, one with brown corner, and remarked in an admonishing tone, "Now don't be late for work. Drink this and jump into your clothes. Do not flush the toilet too hard. Take care not to be late." Franz decided that he had no alternative but leave the house for the whole day in order to perform the job that the old fellow had invented for him, and stay out until 5 or 6 and then have a bite in town before returning. Thus, perforce, he explored the city, or rather what seemed to him its most metropolitan section. The obligatory nature of those excursions envenomed the novelty. By evening he would be much too exhausted to carry out his old glorious plan of sauntering along seductive streets and taking a good preliminary look at genuine harlots. But how to get there? His map seemed to be curiously misleading. One cloudless day, having strayed far enough, he found himself on a broad dreary boulevard, with many steamship-lined offices and art shops. He glanced at the street sign and realized it was world-famous avenue that had seemed so sublime in his dreams. Its rather skimpy lindens were shedding their leaves. The winged arch at one end was sheathed in scaffolding. He traversed wilderness of asphalt. He walked along a canal. In one place there was a rainbow-like splotch of oil on the water, and an intoxicating aroma of honey reminding him of childhood, wafted from a barge where pink-shirted men were unloading mountains of pears and apples. From a bridge he saw 2 women in glistening bathing caps, instantly snorting and rhythmically striking out with their arms as they swam side by side. He spent 2 hours in a museum of antiquities, examining with awe statues and sarcophagi, and the revolting profiles of brown men driving chariots. He took long rests in shabby pubs, and on the fairly comfortable benches of an immense park. He plunged into the depths of the subway and perched on a red leather seat, looking at the shiny stangs up which raced golden reflections, waited impatiently for the coldly clattering blackness to be replaced at last by paradises of luxury and sin that kept eluding him. He also wanted very much to find Dryer's Emporium, about which they used to speak with such reverence in his hometown. The fat telephone directory, however, listed only his home and office. Evidently it must have some other name, and continuing to remain unaware that the heart of the city had moved to the west, Franz dismally wandered through the central and northern streets, where he thought the smartest stores and the liveliest trade must be. He did not dare buy anything, and this tormented him. In this short time he had already managed to spend quite a bit of money, and now Dryer had disappeared. Everything was somehow uncertain. Everything filled him with uneasiness. He tried to make friends with his landlord, who so insistently turned him out of the house for a whole day. But the old man was untalkative and kept lurking in the unknown depths of his little apartment. The first night, however, he met Franz in the corridor, warned him again that the water-closet chain should be pulled very gently, or it would be jerked off, and explained to him at length the mysteries of the district police station, for which he supplied him with some forms, where Franz had to fill in name, marital status, and place of birth. "And another thing," said the old fellow, "about that lady friend of yours. She must not visit you here. I know you are young. I was young once myself. I would be quite ready to give you my permission, but there is my wife, you see. She happens to be away temporarily, but I know she would never allow such visits." Franz flushed and hastily nodded in assent. His landlord's assumption flattered and excited him. He imagined her fragrant, warm-looking lips, her creamy skin, her cut short, the habitual swell of desire. "She is not for me," he thought glumly. "She is remote and cold. She lives in a different world with a very rich and still vigorous husband. She'd send me packing if I were to grow enterprising. My career would be ruined." On the other hand, he thought he might find himself a sweetheart anyway. She too would be shapely, sleek, ripe-lipped, and dark-haired. And with this in mind, he decided to take certain measures. In the morning, when the landlord brought him his coffee, Franz cleared his throat and said, "Listen, if I paid you a small supplement, what I mean is, could I entertain anyone if I wished?" "That depends," said the old man. "A few extra marks?" said Franz. "I understand," said the old man. 5 marks more per month," said Franz. "That's generous," said the old man, and as he turned to go, added in a slyly admonitory tone, "But take care not to be late for work." Thus Martha's haggling had been for naught. Having resolved to pay the extra sum secretly, Franz knew perfectly well he had acted rashly. His money was melting away, and still Dreyer did not telephone. For 4 days running he left the house in disgust punctually at 8, returning at nightfall in a fog of fatigue. He was completely fed up by now with the celebrated avenue. He sent a postcard to his mother with a view of the Brandenburg Gate, and wrote that he was well, and that Dreyer was a very kind uncle. There was no use frightening her, though perhaps she deserved it. And only on Friday night, when Franz was already lying in bed, and saying to himself with a tremor of panic that they had all forgotten him, that he was completely alone in a strange city, and thinking with a certain evil joy that he would stop being faithful to the radiant Martha presiding over his nightly surrenders, and ask lewd old Inricht, his landlord, to let him have a bath in the grimy tub of the flat and direct him to the nearest brothel. At that instant Inricht, in a sleepy voice, called him to the telephone. With terrible haste and excitement, Franz pulled on his pants and rushed barefoot to the passage. A trunk managed to bang him on the knee as he made for the gleam of the telephone at the end of the corridor. Owing perhaps to his being unaccustomed to telephones, he could not identify at first the voice barking in his ears. "Come to my house this minute," the voice said clearly at last. "Do you hear me? Please hurry. I am waiting for you." "Oh, how are you? How are you?" Franz babbled, but the telephone was dead. Dreyer put down the receiver with a flourish and continued rapidly jotting down the things he had to do tomorrow. Then he glanced at his watch, reflecting that his wife would be back from the cinema any moment now. He rubbed his forehead, and with a sly smile took from a drawer a bunch of keys, and a sausage-shaped flashlight with a convex eye. He still had his coat on, for he had just come home without shedding it, had strode right to his study, as he always did when he was in a hurry to write something down or telephone someone. Now he noisily pushed back his chair and began taking off his voluminous camel-hair coat as he walked to the front hall to hang it up there. Into its capacious pocket he dropped the keys and the flashlight. Tom, who was lying by the door, got up and rubbed his soft head against Dreyer's leg. Dreyer resolutely locked himself up in the bathroom, and 3 or 4 senile mosquitoes slept on the whitewashed wall. A minute later, turning down and buttoning up his sleeves at the wrists, he proceeded with another leisurely, homey gait toward the dining room. The table was laid for 2, and a dark red Westphalian ham reposed on a dish amid a mosaic of sausage slices. Large grapes, brimming with greenish light, hung over the edge of their vase. Dreyer plucked off one and tossed it in his mouth. He cast a sidelong glance at the salami, but decided to wait for Martha. The mirror reflected his broad back, clothed in gray flannel, and the tawny strands of his smoothly brushed hair. He turned around quickly, as though feeling that someone was watching him, and moved away. All that remained in the mirror was a white corner of the table against the black background, broken by a crystal glimmer on the sideboard. He heard a faint sound from the far side of that stillness. A little key was seeking a sensitive point in the stillness. It found and pierced that point. It gave one crisp turn, and then everything came to life. Dreyer's gray shoulder passed and repassed in the mirror as he paced hungrily around the table. The front door slammed, and in came Martha. Her eyes glistened, and she was wiping her nose firmly with a Chanel-scented handkerchief. Behind her came a fully awakened dog. Sit down, my love," said Dreyer briskly, and turned on the sophisticated electric current to warm the tea water. "Lovely film," she said. "Hess was wonderful, though I think I liked him better in The Prince." "In what?" "Oh, you remember, the student at Heidelberg, disguised as a Hindu prince?" Martha was smiling. In fact, she smiled fairly often of late, which gladdened Dreyer ineffably. She was in the pleasant position of a person who has been promised a mysterious treat in the near future. She was willing to wait a while, knowing that the treat would come without fail. That day she had summoned the painters to have them brighten up the south side of the terrace wall. A banquet scene in the film had made her hungry, and now she intended to betray her diet, then roll into bed, and perhaps allow Dreyer his long-deferred due. The front door bell tinkled. Tom barked briskly. Martha raised her thin eyebrows in surprise. Dreyer got up with a chuckle, and, chewing as he went, marched into the front hall. She sat half-turned toward the door, holding a raised cup, when Franz, jokingly nudged on by Dreyer, stepped into the dining room, clicked his heels, and quickly walked up to her. She beamed so beautifully, her lips glistened so warmly, that within Dreyer's soul a huge merry throng seemed to break out in deafening applause, and he thought that after a smile like that everything was bound to go well. Martha, as she was once used to, would tell him in breathless detail the entire foolish film as the preface and price of a submissive caress, and on Sunday, instead of tennis, he would go riding with her in the rustling, sun-flecked orange and red park. "First of all, my dear Franz," he said, drawing up a chair for his nephew, "have a bite of something, and here is a drop of kirsch for you." Like an automaton, Franz stuck out his head across the table, aiming for the proffered snifter, and knocked over a slender vase enclosing a heavy brown rose, which should have been removed long ago, reflected Martha. The liberated water spread across the tablecloth. He lost his composure, and no wonder. In the first place, he had not expected to see Martha. Secondly, he had thought Dreyer would receive him in his study and inform him about a very, very important job that had to be tackled immediately. Martha's smile had stunned him. He ascertained to himself the reason for his alarm. Like the fake seed a fakir buries in the ground, only to draw out of it at once, with manic magic, a live rose tree. Martha's request that he conceal from Dreyer their innocent adventure, a request to which he had barely paid attention at the time, now in the husband's presence, had fabulously swelled, turning into a secret erotic bond. He also remembered old Enrich's words about a lady friend, and those words confirmed, as it were, the bliss and the shame. He tried to cast off the spell, but meeting her unbearably intense gaze, dropped his eyes and helplessly continued to dab the wet tablecloth with his handkerchief, despite Dreyer's trying to push his hand away. Moments ago he had been lying in bed, and now here he sat in this resplendent dining room, suffering as if in a dream because he could not halt the dark streamlet that had rounded the salt cellar, and under the cover of the plate's rim was endeavoring to reach the edge of the table. Still smiling, the tablecloth would have to be changed tomorrow anyway. Martha shifted her gaze to his hands, to the gentle play of the knuckles under the taut skin, to the hairy wrist, to the long groping fingers, and felt oddly aware she had nothing woolen on her body that night. Abruptly, Dreyer got up and said, "Franz, this is not very hospitable, but it can't be helped. It's getting late, and you and I must be on our way." "On our way?" Franz uttered in confusion, thrusting the wet ball of his handkerchief onto his pocket. Martha glanced at her husband with cold surprise. "You'll understand presently," said Dreyer, his eyes twinkling with an adventurous light that was all too familiar to Martha. "What a bore," she thought angrily. "What is he up to?" She stopped him for a moment in the front hall and asked him in a rapid whisper, "What are you going? Where are you going? I demand to be told where you are going." "On a wild spree," replied Dreyer, hoping to provoke another marvelous smile. She winced in disgust. He patted her on the cheek and went out. Martha wandered back to the dining room and stood lost in thought behind the chair Franz had vacated. Then, with irritation, she lifted the tablecloth where the water had been spilled and slipped a plate bottom up under it. The looking-glass, which was working hard that night, reflected her green dress, her white neck under the dark weight of her chignon, and the gleam of her emerald earrings. She remained unconscious of the mirror's attention, and as she slowly went about putting the fruit knives away, her reflection would reappear every now and then. Frida joined her for a minute or two, then the light in the dining room clicked off, and nibbling at her necklace, Martha went upstairs to her bedroom. "I bet he wants me to think he is kidding because he isn't. I bet it's exactly the way it will be," she thought. "He'll fix him up with some dirty slut, and that will be the end of it." As she undressed, she felt she was about to cry. Just you wait until you get home, especially if you are pulling my leg. And what manners! You invite the poor boy and then whisk him away in the middle of the night. How disgraceful! Once again, so many times previously, she went over all her husband's transgressions in her memory. It seemed to her that she remembered them all. They were numerous. That did not prevent her, however, from assuring her married sister Hilda, when the latter would have come from Hamburg, that she was happy, and that her marriage was a happy one. And Martha really did believe that her marriage was no different from any other marriage, that discord always reigned, and that the wife always struggled against her husband, against his peculiarities, against his departures from the accepted rules, and all this amounted to a happy marriage. An unhappy marriage was when the husband was poor, or had landed in prison, some shady business, or kept squandering his earnings on kept women. Therefore, Martha never complained about her situation, since it was natural and customary one. Her mother had died when Martha was 3, a not unusual arrangement. A first stepmother soon died too, and that also ran in some families. The second and final stepmother, who died only recently, was a lovely woman of quite gentle birth, whom everybody adored. Papa, who had started his career as a saddler and ended it as the bankrupt owner of an artificial leather factory, was desperately eager she marry the hussar, and for some reason he dubbed Dreyer, whom she barely knew when he proposed in 1920, at the same time that Hilda became engaged to the fat little purser of a second-rate Atlantic liner. Dreyer was getting rich with miraculous ease, and he was fairly attractive but bizarre and unpredictable, sang off-key, silly arias, and made her silly presents. As a well-bred girl with long lashes and glowing cheeks, she said she would make up her mind the next time he came to Hamburg. Before leaving for Berlin, she gave her a monkey, which she loathed. Fortunately, a handsome young cousin with whom she had gone rather far before he became one of Hilda's first lovers taught it to light matches. Its little jersey caught fire, and the clumsy animal had to be destroyed. When Dreyer returned a week later, she allowed him to kiss her on the cheek. Poor old Papa got so high at the party that he beat up the fiddler, which was pardonable, seeing all the hard luck he had encountered in his long life. It was only after the wedding, when her husband cancelled an important business trip in favor of a ridiculous honeymoon in Norway. Why Norway, of all places? That certain doubts began to assail her. But the villa in Grunwald soon dissipated them, and so on. Not very interesting recollections. In the darkness of the taxi, the unfortunate Icarus was still being repaired. The rented substitute, a quirky Oriole, had not been a success. Dreyer remained mysteriously silent. He might have been asleep, had not his cigar glowed rhythmically. Franz was silent too, wondering uneasily where he was being taken. After the third or fourth turn, he had lost all sense of direction. Up to now he had explored, besides the quiet quarter where he lived, only the avenue of lindens and its surroundings at the other end of the city. Everything that lay between those two live oases was a terra incognita blank. He gazed out of the window and saw the dark streets, gradually acquiring a certain limpidity, then dimming again, then again welling with light, waning once more, brightening again until, having matured in the darkness, they suddenly burst forth scintillating in fabulous colors, gemmed cascades, blazing advertisements. A tall steepled church glided past under the umber sky. Presently, skidding slightly on the damp asphalt, the car drew up at the curve. Only then did Franz understand. In sapphire letters, with a diamond flourish prolonging the final vowel, a glittering 40-foot sign spelled the word D-A-N-D-Y, which now he remembered hearing before. A fool that he was. Dreyer took him under the arm and led him up to one of the 10 radiantly lit display windows. Like tropical blossoms in a hothouse, ties and socks vied in delicate shades with the rectangles of folded shirts or drooped lazily from gilded bows, while in depths of opal-tinted pajama, with the face of oriental idol, stood fully erect god of that garden. But Dreyer did not allow Franz to dally in contemplation. He led him smartly past the other windows, and there, flashed in turn by an orgy of glossy footwear, a fata morgana of coats, a graceful flight of hats, gloves, and canes, and a sunny paradise of sports articles, that Franz found himself in a dark passageway, where stood an old man in a black cape, with a badge on his visored cap, next to a slender-legged woman in furs. They both looked at Dreyer. The watchman recognized him and put his hand to his cap. The bright-eyed prostitute glanced at Franz and modestly moved away. As soon as he disappeared behind Dreyer in that gloom of a courtyard, she resumed her talk with the watchman about rheumatism and its cures. The yard formed a triangular dead end between the windowless walls. There was an odor of damp mingled with that of urine and beer. In one corner either something was dumped, or else it was a cart, with its shafts in the air. Dreyer produced the flashlight from his pocket, and a skimming circle of gray light outlined a grating, the moving shadows of descending steps, an iron door. Taking a childish delight in choosing the most mysterious entrance, Dreyer unlocked the door. Franz ducked and followed him into a dark stone passage where the round of fitting light now picked out a door. If any illegal attempt had been made to tamper with it, it would have emitted a wild ringing. But for this door, too, Dreyer had a small noiseless key, and again Franz ducked. In the murky basement through which they walked, one could distinguish sacks and crates piled here and there, and something like straw rustled underfoot. The mobile beam turned a corner, and yet another door appeared. Beyond it rose a bare staircase that melted into the blackness. They shuffled up the stone steps, explorers of a buried temple. With dreamlike unexpectedness, they emerged presently into a vast hall. The light glanced across metallic gallows, and then along folds of drapery, gigantic wardrobes, swinging mirrors, and broad-shouldered black figures. Dryer stopped, put away his light, and said softly in the dark, "Attention!" His hand could be heard fumbling, and a single pear-shaped bulb brightly illuminated a counter. The remainder of the hall and endless labyrinth remained submerged in darkness, and Franz found it a little eerie to have this one nook singled out by the strong light. "Lesson 1, Dryer said solemnly, and with a flourish went behind the counter. It is doubtful if Franz benefited from this fantastic night lesson. Everything was too strange, and Dryer impersonated a salesman with too much whimsy. And yet, despite the baroque nonsense, there was something about the angular reflections in the surrounding spectral abyss, where vague fabrics had been handled and rehandled during the day, reposed in weary attitudes, which long remained in Franz's memory and imparted a certain dark, luxurious coloring, at least at first, to the basic background against which his everyday salesman's toil began to sketch later its plain, comprehensible, often tiresome pattern. And it was not on personal experience, not on the recollection of distant days when he actually had worked behind the counter, that Dryer drew that night as he showed Franz how to sell neckties. Instead, he soared into the ravishing realm of inutile imagination, demonstrating not the way ties should be sold in real life, but the way they might be sold if the salesman were both artist and clairvoyant. "I want a simple blue one," Franz, prompted by him, would say in a wooden schoolboy voice. "Certainly, sir," Dryer answered briskly, and whisking off several cardboard boxes from a shelf, nimbly opened them at the counter. "How do you like this one?" he inquired, not without a shadow of pensiveness, nodding a mottled magenta and black tie on his hand, and holding it away a little as if admiring it himself in the capacity of the independent artist. Franz was silent. "An important technique," explained Dryer, changing his voice. "Let's see if you got the point. Now you go behind the counter. In this box here are some solid-colored ties. They cost 4 or 5 marks. And here we have stylish ones on the orchid side, as we say, at 8, 10, or even 14. The Lord forgive us. Now then, you are the salesman, and I am a young man, a ninny, if you'll excuse me, inexperienced, irresolute, easily tempted." Franz self-consciously went behind the counter. Hunching his shoulders and narrowing his eyes if he were nearsighted, Dryer said in a high-pitched quaver, "I want a plain blue one, and please, not too expensive. Smile," he added in an impromptu whisper. Franz bent low over one of the boxes, fumbled awkwardly, and produced a plain blue tie. "Aha, I caught you!" Dryer exclaimed cheerfully. "I knew you had not understood, or else you were color-blind. And then goodbye, dear uncle and aunt. Why on earth must you give me the cheapest one? You should have done as I did. Stun the ninny first with an expensive one, no matter what color. But be sure it's gaudy and costly, or costly and elegant, and maybe squeeze out of him an extra throb and an extra bob, as they say in London. Here, take this one. Now knot it in your hand. Wait, don't worry it like that. Swing it around your finger. Thus. Remember, the slightest delay in the rhythm costs you a moment of the customer's attention. Hypnotize him with the flip of the tie you display. You must make it bloom before the idiot's eyes. No, that's not a knot. That's some kind of tumor. Watch. Hold your hand straight. Let's try this expensive vampire red. Now, we suppose it is I who am looking at it, and I still don't yield to temptation. But I wanted a plain blue one," said Dryer in a high voice, and then again in a whisper. "Ah, no, keep pushing the vampire one in his stupid face. Perhaps you'll wear him down. And watch him, watch his eyes. If he looks at the thing, that's already something. Only if he does not look at all, and begins to frown, and clear his darn throat, only then, you understand, only then give him what he requested, always choosing the dearest of the 3 plain blue ones, of course. But even as you yield to his coarse request, give, a slight shrug. Look at me now and smile sort of disdainfully, as if to say, this isn't fashionable at all, and frankly, this is for peasants, for droshky coachmen. But if you really want it, I'll take this blue one," the Dryer said, in his calmly voice. Franz grimly handed him the tie across the counter. Dryer's guffaw awakened a rude echo. "No," he said. "No, my friend, not at all. First you lay it aside to your right. Then you inquire if he does not need something else, for instance, handkerchiefs or some fancy studs, and only after he has thought a bit and shaken his calf's head. Only then produce this fountain pen, which is at present, and write out and give him the price slip for the cashier. But the rest is routine. No, keep it. I said you will be shown that part tomorrow by Mr. Pifke, a very pedantic man. Now let's continue." Dryer hoisted himself a little heavily to a sitting position on the counter, casting as he did so a sharp black shadow that dived headfirst into the darkness, which seemed to have moved closer to the better to hear. He started to finger the silks in the boxes and to instruct Franz how to remember ties by touch and tint, how to develop, in other words, lost on Franz, a chromatic and tactile memory, how to eradicate from one's artistic and commercial consciousness styles and specimens that have been sold out so as to make room for new ones in one's mind, and how to determine price and marks immediately and then add the finnings from the tag. Several times he jumped off the counter, gesticulating grotesquely, impersonating the customer irritated by everything he was shown. The brute who objected to his being told the price before he asked for it, and the saint whom price was no object, also an old lady buying a tie for her grandson, a fireman at postum, a foreigner unable to express anything comprehensible, a Frenchman who wants a cravat, an Italian who demands a cravata, and a Russian who pleads gently for a galstuk, whereupon he would reply at once to himself, pressing his fingers lightly against the counter, and for each occasion inventing a particular variety of intonation and smile. Then seating himself again, slightly swinging his foot in a glossy shoe, as his shadow flapped a black wing on the floor, he discussed the tender and cheerful attitude a salesman should have toward man-made things, and he confessed that sometimes one felt absurdly sorry for the outmoded ties and obsolete socks that were still so neat and fresh, but completely unwanted. An odd, dreamy smile hovered under his mustache, and alternately creased and smoothed out the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes and mouth, whilst extenuated Franz, leaning against a wardrobe, listened in a torpor to him. Dryer paused, and as Franz realized that the lesson was over, he could not help casting a covetous glance at the iridescent wonders now scattered in real life on the counter. Again producing his flashlight and turning off the switch on the wall, Dryer led Franz over a waste of dark carpeting into the shadowy depths of the hall. He flung off in passing the canvas of a small table and trained his light on cufflinks sparkling like eyes on their blue velvet cushion. A little further, with playful nonchalance, he tipped off its stand a huge beach ball, which rolled soundlessly away into the dark, far all the way to the Bay of Pomerania on its soft white sands. They walked back along the stone passages, and as he was locking the last door, Dryer recalled not without pleasure the enigmatic disorder he had left behind while neglecting to think that perhaps someone else would be held responsible for it. As soon as they emerged from the dark courtyard into the wetly gleaming street, Dryer hailed a passing taxi and offered Franz a lift home. Franz hesitated, staring at the festive vista at last of the animated boulevard. "Or do you have a date with a—" Dryer consulted his wristwatch. "Sleepy sweetheart?" Franz licked his lips and shook his head. "As you wish," said Dryer, with a laugh, and thrusting his head out of the cab, he shouted in parting, "Be at the store tomorrow, 9 o'clock sharp." The luster of the black asphalt was filmed by a blend of dim hues, through which here and there vivid rins and oval holes made by the rain puddles revealed the authentic colors of deep reflections, a vermilion diagonal band, a cobalt wedge, a green spiral, scattered glimpses into a humid upside-down world, into a dizzy geometry of gems. The kaleidoscopic effect suggested someone's jiggling every now and then the pavement so as to change the combination of numberless colored fragments. Meanwhile, shafts and ripples of life passed by, marking the course of every car. Shop windows, bursting with tints of radiance, oozed, squirted, and splashed out into the rich blackness. At every corner, emblem of ineffable happiness, stood a sleek-hosed harlot whose features there was no time to study. Another already beckoned in the distance, and beyond her a third, and Franz knew without any doubt where those mysterious live beacons led. Every street lamp, its halo spreading like a spiky star, every rosy glow, every spasm of golden light, and the silhouettes of lovers pulsating against each other in every recess of porch and passage, and those half-opened painted lips that fleeted past him, and the black, moist, tender asphalt, all of it was assuming a specific significance and finding a name. Saturated with sweat, limp with delicious languor, moving with slow motion of a sleepwalker called back to his rumpled warm pillow, Franz went back to bed without having noticed how he had re-entered the house and reached his room. He stretched, he passed his palms over his hairy legs, unglued and cupped himself, and almost instantly sleep, with a bow, handed him the key of its city. He understood the meaning of all the lights, the sounds, and perfumes as everything blended into a single blissful image. Now he seemed to be in a mirrored hall, which wondrously, opened on a watery abyss. Water glistened in the most unexpected places. He went toward a door past the perfectly credible motorcycle, which his landlord was starting with his red heel, and anticipating indescribable bliss. Franz opened the door and saw Martha standing near the bed. Eagerly he approached, but Tom kept getting in the way. Martha was laughing and shooing away the dog. Now he saw quite closely her glossy lips, her neck swelling with glee, and he too began to hurry, undoing buttons, pulling a blood-stained bone out of the dog's jaws, and feeling an unbearable sweetness welling up within him. He was about to clasp her but suddenly he could no longer contain his boiling ecstasy. Martha sighed and opened her eyes. She thought she had been awakened by a noise in the street. One of their neighbors had a remarkably loud motorcycle. Actually, it was only her husband snoring away with particular abandon. She recalled she had gone to bed without awaiting his return, raised herself, and called to him sharply. Then, reaching across the night table, she began roughly tousling his hair, the only trick that worked. His snoring ceased, his lips smacked once or twice, the light on the table flashed on, showing the pink of her hand. "The awakening of the lion," said Dreyer, rubbing his eyes with his fist like a child. "Where did you go?" Martha asked, glaring at him. He stared sleepily at her ivory shoulder, at the rose of his bared breast, at the long strand of an ebony hair falling on her cheek, and gave a soft chuckle as he slowly leaned back on his pillows. "I've been showing him Dandy," he muttered cozily. "A night lesson. He can now knot a tie on his paw or his tail. Very entertaining and instructive." Ah, that was it. Martha felt so relieved, so magnanimous, that she almost offered, but she was also too sleepy and very happy. Without speaking, she switched off the light. "Let's go riding Sunday. What do you say?" A voice murmured tenderly in the dark, but she was already lost in a dream. 3 lecherous Arabs were haggling over her with a bronze-torsoed, handsome slaver. The voice repeated its question in an even more tender, even more questioning tone. A melancholy pause. Then he turned his pillow in the quest of a cooler hollow, sighed, presently was snoring again. In the morning, as Dreyer was hurriedly enjoying a soft-boiled egg with buttered toast, the most delicious meal known to man, before dashing off to the Emporium, Frida informed him that the repaired car was waiting at the door. Here Dreyer remembered that in the past few days, and particularly after the recent smash, he had repeatedly had a rather amusing thought which he somehow never brought to its conclusion. But he must act cautiously in a roundabout manner. A blunt question would lead nowhere. The rascal would leer and deny everything. Would the gardener know? If he did, he would shield him. Dreyer gulped down his coffee and, blinking, poured himself a second cup. Of course I could be mistaken. He sipped up the last sweet drop, threw his napkin on the table, and hurried out. The napkin slowly crept off the edge of the table and fell limply onto the floor. Yes, the car had been well repaired. It gleamed with its new coat of black paint, the chrome of its headlight rims, the blazon-like emblem, the crest of the radiator grille. A silver boy with azure wings. A slightly embarrassed smile bared the chauffeur's ugly gums and teeth as he doffed his blue cap and opened the door. Dreyer glanced at him askance. "Hello, hello," he said. "So here we are together again." He buttoned all the buttons of his overcoat and continued, "This must have cost a tidy sum. I haven't looked at the bill yet, but that's not the point. I'd be willing to pay even more for the sheer fun of it. A most exhilarating experience, to be sure. Unfortunately, neither my wife nor the police saw the joke." He tried to think of something else to add, failed, unbuttoned his coat again, and got into the car. "I gave his physiognomy a thorough examination," he reflected to the accompaniment of the motor's gentle purr. "Still, it is impossible to draw any conclusion yet. Of course, his eyes are sort of twinkly, of course. They have those little bags under them. But that may be normal with him. Next time I'll have to make a good sniff." That morning, as agreed, he visited the Emporium and introduced Franz to Mr. Pifke. Pifke was burly, dignified, and smartly dressed. He had blonde eyelashes, baby-colored skin, and a profile that prudently stopped halfway between man and teapot, and a second-rate diamond on his plump auricular. He felt for Franz the respect due to the boss's nephew, while Franz gazed with envy and awe at the architectonic perfection of Pif's trousers creases and the transparent handkerchief peeping out of his breast pocket. Dreyer did not even mention the lesson of the night before. With his complete approval, Pifke assigned Franz not to the tie counter, but to the sporting goods department. Pifke went to work on Franz with zeal, and with his training methods turned out to be very different from Dreyer's, containing as they did a great deal more arithmetic than Franz had expected. Neither had he expected his feet to ache so much from constant standing, or his face from the mechanical expression of affability. As usual, in autumn, that part of the emporium was much quieter than the others. Various bodybuilding appliances, ping-pong paddles, striped wooden scarves, soccer boots with black cleats and white laces moved fairly well. The existence of public pools accounted for a continued small demand for bathing suits, but their real season had passed while the time for skates and skis had not yet come. Thus no rush of customers hampered Franz's training, and he had to complete leisure to learn his job. His main colleagues were two girls, one red-haired and sharp-nosed, the other a stout, energetic blonde, inexorably accompanied by a sour smell, and an athletically built young man wearing the same kind of tortoiseshell glasses as Franz. He casually informed Franz about the prizes he had won in swimming competitions, and Franz envied him, being himself an excellent swimmer. It was with Schwimmer's help that Franz selected the cloth for the two suits and a supply of ties, shirts, and socks. It was he, too, who helped Franz to unravel some minor mysteries of salesmanship far more astutely than Pifke, whose true function was to promenade about the place and grandly arrange meetings between customer and salesman. During the first few days, Franz, dazed and self-conscious, and trying not to shiver, his department was over-ventilated and full of its own athletic drafts, simply stood in a corner trying not to attract attention, avidly following the actions of his colleagues, memorizing their professional movements and intonations, and then abruptly, with unbearable clarity, imagining Martha, the way she had of putting her hand to the back of her chignon, or glancing at her nails and emerald ring. Very soon, however, under the approving, solicitous gaze of Mr. Schwimmer, Franz started selling on his own. He remembered forever his first customer, a stout old man who asked for a ball. A ball! At once this ball went off, bouncing in his imagination, multiplying and scattering, and Franz's head became a playground for all the balls in the store, small, medium, large, yellow leather ones with stitched sections, fluffy white ones bearing the violet signature of their maker, little black ones as hard as stone, extra light orange and blue ones of vacational size, balls of rubber, celluloid, wood, ivory, and all they rolled off in different directions, leaving behind a single sphere, shining in the middle of his mind, when the customer added placidly, "I need a ball for my dog." "Third shelf on your right, tooth-proof," came Schwimmer's prompt whisper, and Franz, with a grin of relief and sweat on his brow, started to open one wrong box after another, but at last found what was needed. On a month or so, he had grown so completely accustomed to his work he no longer got flustered, would boldly bid the inarticulate to repeat their request, and would condescendingly counsel the puny and shy. Fairly well-built, fairly broad-shouldered, slim but not skinny, he observed with pleasure his passage in a harem of mirrors, and the glance of obviously infatuated shop-girls, and the flash of 3 silver clips over his heart. Uncle's fountain pen and 2 pencils, lilac and lead. He might have passed indeed for a perfectly respectable, perfectly ordinary salesman, were it not for a blend of details that only a detective of genius might have discerned, a predatory angularity of nostril and cheekbone, a strange weakness about the mouth as if he were always out of breath or had just sneezed, and those eyes, poorly disguised by glasses, restless eyes, tragic eyes, ruthless and helpless, of an impure greenish shade, which inflamed blood vessels around the iris, but the only detective around was an elderly woman, always with the same parcel, who did not bother patrolling sports, but had quite a lot to do in the neckties department. Acting upon impeccable Pifke's delicately formulaic suggestions, Franz acquired sybarite habits of personal hygiene. He now washed his feet at least twice a week and changed his starched collar and cuffs practically every day. Every evening he brushed his suit and shined his shoes. He used all sorts of nice lotions, smelling of spring flowers and Pifke. He hardly ever skipped his Saturday bath. He put on a clean shirt every Wednesday and Sunday. He made a point of changing his warm underwear at least once in 10 days. How shocked his mother would be, he reflected, if she saw his laundry bills. He accepted with alacrity the tedium of his job, but disliked intensely the necessity of having meals with the rest of the staff. He had hoped that in Berlin he would gradually get over his morbid juvenile squeamishness, but he kept finding mean opportunities to torture him. At table he sat between the plump blonde and the champion swimmer. Whenever she stretched toward the bed basket with salt, her armpit flooded him with nausea, reminding him of a detested spinster teacher at school. The champion on his other side had another infirmity, that of spitting whenever he spoke, and Franz found himself reverting to his school-days system of protecting his plate from the spray with forearm and elbow. Only once did he accompany Mr. Schwimmer to the public pool. The water proved to be much too cool and far from clean, and his colleague's roommate, a sun-lamp-tanned young Swede, had embarrassing manners. Basically, though, the emporium, the glossy goods, the brisk or suave dialogue with the customer, who always seemed to be the same actor changing his voice and mask, all this routine with a superficial trickle of repetitive events and sensations, which touched him as little as if he was one of those figures of fashion with waxen or wooden faces and suits pressed by the iron of perfection, arrested in a state of colorful putrefaction on their temporary pedestals and platforms, their arms half bent and half extended in a parody of pastoral appeal. Young female customers and a fleet-footed, bob-haired salesgirls from other departments hardly excited him at all. Like the colored commercial stills advertising furniture or furs that succeeded each other on the cinema screen for a long time unaccompanied by music before a fascinating film starts. All the details of his work were as inevitable as they were trivial. Around 6 it all stopped abruptly, and then the music would start playing. Almost nightly, at what monstrous melancholy lurked in that almost, he would visit the Dryers. He dined there only on Sundays, and not every Sunday at that. On weekdays, after a bite at the same cheap restaurant where he had lunched, he took the bus or walked to their villa. A score of evenings had gone by, and everything remained the same. The welcome buzz of the wicket, the pretty lantern illuminating the path through the pattern of ivy, the damp exhalation of the lawn, the gravel's crunch, the tinkle of the doorbell, winking off into the house in a quest of the maid, the burst of light, Frida's placid face, and suddenly life, the tender reverberations of radio music. She was generally alone. Dreyer, a fantastic but punctual person, would arrive exactly in time for what Franz called supper, and the evening tea would always telephone when he thought he might be late. In his presence, Franz felt uncomfortable to the point of numbness, and therefore managed to evolve in those days a certain air of grim familiarity in response to Dreyer's natural joviality. But while he was alone with Martha, he had a constant sensation of languorous pressure somewhere at the top of his spine. His chest felt tight, his legs weak. His fingers retained for a long time the cool strength of her handshake. He would compute within half an inch of the exact degree to which she shoved her legs while walking about the room and while sitting with her legs crossed, and he perceived almost without looking the tense sheen of her stocking, the swell of her left calf over the right knee, and the fold of her skirt, sloping soft supple, in which one would have liked to bury one's face. Sometimes, when she got up and walked past him to the radiola, the light would fall at such an angle as to let the outline of her thighs show through the light fabric of her skirt, and once she got a ladder-like run in her stocking, and licking her finger, quickly dabbed at the silk. Occasionally, the sensation of languid weight became too much for him, and taking advantage of her looking away, he would search her beauty for some little fault on which he could prop his mind and sober his fancy, and thus allay the relentless stir of his senses. Now and then he had the impression that he had indeed found the saving flaw, a hard line near her mouth, a pockmark above the eyebrow, a too prominent pout of those full lips in profile, a dark shadow of down above them, especially noticeable when the powder came off, but in turn of her head or the slightest change of expression would restore her face to such adorable charm that he slipped back into the private abyss even deeper. By means of those rapid glances he made a complete study of her, followed and forefelt her gestures, anticipated the banal, but to him unique movement of her alertly raised hand when one end of a tiny comb would slacken its grip on her heavy bun. Most of all, he was tormented by the grace and power of her bare white neck, by that rich, delicately grained texture of skin and the fashionable glimpses of nudity allowed by short, flimsy skirts. At every new visit he added something to the collection of enchantments which he would gloat over in his solitary bed, choosing what of his frenzied fancy would work on and spin itself. There was the evening when he saw a miniature brown birthmark on her arm. There was the moment when she bent low from her seat and turned back the corner of a rug, and he noticed the parting of her breasts and was relieved when the black silk of her bodice became taut again. There was also the night when she was getting ready for a dance, and he was stunned to observe that her armpits were as smooth and white as a statue's. She questioned him about his childhood, his mother, a dull theme, his narrative town, an even duller one. Once Tom put his muzzle in Franz's lap and yawned, enveloping him in an endurable odor, foul herring carrion. "That is how my childhood smells," muttered Franz as he pushed the dog's head away. She did not hear or did not understand, and asked what he had said, but he did not repeat his confession. He talked about his school, about the dust and the boredom, about his mother's indigestible pies, and about the butcher next door, a dignified gentleman in a white waistcoat, who at one time used to come to dinner every day, and eat mutton in a disgustingly professional manner. "Why disgustingly?" Martha interrupted in surprise. "God, what nonsense I'm spouting," he thought, and with mechanical enthusiasm described for the 100th time the river, the boating, the diving, the beer drinking under the bridge. She would switch the radio from song to speech, and he would reverently listen to his Spanish lesson, a lecture on the benefits of athletics, to Mr. Stresemann's conciliatory tones, and then back to some bizarre nasal music. She would tell him in detail the plot of a film, the story of Dreyer's lucky speculations in the days of the inflation, and the gist of an article on the removal of fruit stains. And all the time she would be thinking, how much longer would he need to get started? And simultaneously she was amused and even a little touched that he was so unsure of himself, and that without help he would probably never get started at all. Gradually, however, vexation began to predominate. November was being squandered on trifles as money is squandered on trifles when you get stranded in some dull town. With a vague resentment she recalled that her sister had already had at least 4 or 5 lovers in succession, and that Willie Wadd's young wife had 2 simultaneously, and yet Martha was already past 34. It was high time. In turn she had been given a husband, a beautiful villa, antique silver, an automobile. The next gift on her list was Franz. Yet it was all not quite so simple. There intruded an alien little breeze, a special ardor, a suspicious softness. It was no use trying to sleep. Franz opened his window. At the transit from the autumn to winter, quirky nights occur when suddenly, out of nowhere, there passes a breath of warm, humid air, a belated sigh of summer. He stood in his new zebra pajamas, holding on to the window frame, and then leaned out, morosely released a long spurt of saliva, and listened, waiting for it to sputter against the sidewalk. However, since he lived on the 5th floor, and not on the 2nd as he had at home, Franz heard nothing. With a slow clatter he shut the window and went back to bed. That night he realized, as one becomes abruptly aware of suffering from a fatal illness, that he has already known Martha for more than 2 months, and was draining his passion in useless fantasies, and Franz told the pillow in the half-obscene, half-grandiloquent idiom he affected when talking to himself, "Never mind, better betray my career than wait till my brain cracks. Tomorrow, yes, tomorrow, I'll grab her and tumble her on the sofa, on the floor, on the table, on broken crockery. Crazy Franz." Tomorrow came. He went home after work, changed his socks, brushed his teeth, put on his new silk scarf, and marched to the bus stop with martial determination. On the way he kept persuading himself that of course she loved him, that only out of pride she concealed her feeling, and that was a pity. If only she leaned toward him as if by chance, and brushed her cheek against his temple over a blurred album, or if she did again as she had the other night, if for a moment she pressed her back to his before the front hall mirror and said, turning her perfumed head, "I'm an inch taller than you," or if... But here he pulled himself together and soundlessly told the bus conductor, "That's weakness, there should be no weakness. Let her be tonight, even colder than usual, no matter now. As he rang the bell, there flashed through his mind a poltroon's hope that perhaps by some chance Dreyer had already come home. Dreyer had not. As Franz passed through the first 2 rooms, he pictured how in an instant he would push open that door over there, enter her boudoir, and see her a low-cut black dress with emeralds around her neck, immediately embrace her hard, make her crunch, make her faint, make her spill her jewels. He pictured it so vividly that for a split second he saw before him his own receding back, saw his hand, saw himself opening the door, and because that sensation was a foray into the future, and it is forbidden to ransack the future, he was swiftly punished. In the first place, as he caught up with himself, he tripped and sent the floor flying open. In the second, the room Martha called the boudoir was empty. In the third, when she came in, she was wearing a beige dress with a high neck and a long line of buttons. In the fourth place, such a familiar, helpless timidity came over him that all he could hope was to speak more or less articulately. Martha had decided that tonight he would kiss her for the first time. Characteristically, she chose one of her monthly days lest she succumb too soon, and in the wrong spot, to a yearning that otherwise she could no longer resist. In anticipation of that prudently circumscribed embrace, she did not immediately settle down on the sofa near him. As tradition demanded, she turned on the radio, brought a little silver case with Libidettes, Viennese cigarettes, rearranged the fold of a window curtain, turned on the opal glow of a table lamp, switched off the ceiling light, and, choosing the worst subject imaginable, began telling Franz of the day before Dreyer had started on some mysterious new project. A profitable one, let us hope. And she picked up and placed on the back of the chair a pink woolen shawl, and only then gently sat down next to Franz, not quite comfortably, holding one leg under her and adjusting the pleats of her skirt. For no reason at all, he began extolling Uncle, saying how frightfully grateful he was, how fond he had grown of him. Martha nodded absently. He would alternately puff on his cigarette and hold it next to his knee, drawing the cardboard tip across the fabric of his trouser leg. The smoke, like a flow of spectral milk, crept along the clingy nap. Martha extended her hand and with a smile touched his knee as if playing with his phantom larva of smoke. He felt the tender pressure of her fingers. He was hungry, sweaty, and completely impotent. And my mother, in every letter, you know, sends him her respectful love, her regards, her thanks. The smoke dissolved. Franz kept sniffing as he did when he was especially nervous. Martha got up and turned off the radio. He lit another cigarette. She had now thrown the pink shawl over her shoulders, and like a woman in some old-fashioned romance, gazed at him fixedly from the far corner of the settee. With a wooden laugh, he recounted an anecdote from yesterday's paper. Then, nudging the door with his paw, a very sad, very sleek, very helpless Tom appeared, and Franz for the first time actually talked to the astonished animal, and at last, thank God, beloved Dreyer arrived. Franz came home around 11, and as he was proceeding along the passage on tiptoe to the foul little water closet, he heard a chuckle coming from the landlord's door. The door was ajar. He peeped into the room, and as he passed, old Enrique, clad only in his nightshirt, was standing on all fours with his wrinkled and hoary rear toward a brilliant cheval glass. Bidiglow, his congested face frigid with white hair, like the head of a professor in the Hindu prince farce. He was peering back through the archway of his bare thighs at the reflection of his bleak buttocks. Five. There was indeed an air of mystery about Dreyer's new project. It all began one Wednesday in mid-November, when he received a visit from a nondescript stranger with a cosmopolitan name and no determinable origin. He might have been Czech, Jewish, Bavarian, Irish. It was entirely a matter of personal evaluation. Dreyer was sitting in his office, a huge quiet place with huge unquiet windows, with a huge desk and huge leather armchairs, when, having traversed an olive-green corridor past glass expanses full of the hurricane-like clatter of typewriters, this nondescript gentleman was ushered in. He was hatless but wore a topcoat and warm gloves. The card that had preceded him by a couple of minutes bore the title of inventor under his name. Now Dreyer was fond, perhaps over-fond, of inventors. With a mesmeric gesture, he deposited his guest in the leather luxury of an overstuffed chair with an ashtray affixed to his giant paw, and toying with a red and blue pencil, sat down half facing him. The man's thick eyebrows wiggled like a furry black caterpillar's, and the freshly shaven parts of his melancholy face had a dark turquoise cast. The inventor began from afar, and this Dreyer approved. All business ought to be handled with that artful caution. Lowering his voice, the inventor passed with laudable smoothness from the preface to the substance. Dreyer laid down his pencil. Suavely and in detail, the Magyar, or Frenchman, or Pole, stated his business. "You say, then, that it has nothing to do with wax?" asked Dreyer. The inventor raised his fingers. "Absolutely nothing, though I call it Voskin, a trade name that will be in all dictionaries tomorrow. Its main component is a resilient, colorless product resembling flesh. I particularly stress its elasticity, its pliability, its replicability, so to speak." "Speak by all means," said Dreyer. "And what about that electric impellant? I don't quite understand. What do you mean, for example, by contractive transmission?" The inventor smiled a wise smile. "Ah, that's the whole point. Obviously, it would be much simpler if I showed you the blueprints. but it is also obvious that I am not yet inclined to do so. I have explained how you can apply my invention. Now it's up to you to give me the funds for the construction of the first sample." "How much would you need?" asked Dryer with curiosity. The inventor replied in detail. "Don't you think," said Dryer with a mischievous glint in his eye, "that perhaps your imagination is worth much more? I highly respect and value the imagination in others. If, for example, a man came to me and said, 'My dear Herr Director, I would like to dream a little. How much will you pay me for dreaming?' and then maybe I would begin negotiations with him. Whereas you, my dear inventor, you offer at once something practical, factory production, and so forth. Who cares about realization? I am duty-bound to believe in a dream, but to believe in the embodiment of that dream, pah!" One of Dryer's lip bursts. At first the inventor did not understand, and then he understood and was offended. "In other words, you simply refuse?" asked gloomily. Dryer sighed. The inventor clucked his tongue and leaned back in his chair, clasping and unclasping his hands. "This is my life's work," he said at last, staring into space. "Like Hercules, I have been struggling with the tentacles of a dream for 10 years, mastering this softness, this flexibility, this stylized animation, if I may use the expression." "Of course you may," said Dryer. "I'd even say that's better than what was it? Reflexibility?" "Tell me," he began, picking out the pencil again, a good sign, though his interlocutor could not know it. "Have you approached anyone else with that offer?" "Well," said the inventor with perfectly mimicked sincerity, "I confess this is the first time. In fact, I have just arrived in Germany. This is Germany, isn't it?" he added, looking around. "So I'm told," said Dryer. There was a fruit-bearing pause. "Your dream is enchanting," said Dryer, pensively. "Enchanting." The other grimaced and flared up. "Stop harping on dreams, sir. They have come true. They have become flesh, in more senses than one, even though I may be a pauper, and cannot build my Eden and Eidolons. Have you ever read Epictetus?" Dryer shook his head. "Nor have I, but do give me a chance to prove that I am no quack. They told me you were interested in such innovations. Just think what a delight this would be, what an adornment, what an astounding, and permit me to say, an even artistic achievement." "What guarantee do you offer me?" asked Dryer, relishing the entertainment. "The guarantee of the human spirit," the inventor said trenchantly. Dryer laughed. "That's more like it. You revert to my original viewpoint." He thought for a moment, then added, "I think I want to roll your offer around in my head. Who knows, maybe I'll see your invention in my next dream, and my imagination must become steeped in it. At the moment I can say neither yes nor no. Now run along home. Where are you staying?" "Hotel Montevideo," said the inventor, an idiotically misleading name, but also a familiar one, though I can't remember why. Video. "I see you have my friend's Pugowitz tap-water filter," said the inventor, pointing at the faucet in the corridor with the air of Rembrandt, indicating a Claude Lorraine. Video, repeated Dryer. "No, I don't know. Well, ponder out our talk. Decide if you really want to kill a delightful fancy by selling it to the factory, and in a week or 10 days he'll ring you up. And pardon me for alluding to this. I hope you'll be a bit more communicative, a bit more trusting." When his visitor had left, Dryer sat motionless, his hands thrust deep into his trouser pockets. "No, he is not a charlatan," he reflected, "or at least he is not aware of being one. Why not have a little fun? If it is all he says, the results really may be curious." The telephone emitted a discreet buzz, and for a time he forgot about the inventor. That evening, however, he hinted to Martha that he was about to embark on a completely new project, and when she asked if it were profitable, he narrowed his eyes and nodded. "Oh, very, very profitable, my love." Next morning, as he was snoring under the shower, he decided not to receive the inventor again. At lunchtime, in a restaurant, he remembered him with pleasure and decided that the invention was something unique and irresistible. Upon coming home to supper, he remarked to Martha casually that the project had fallen through. She was wearing her beige dress and was wrapped in a pink shawl. Though it was quite warm in the house, Franz, whom he considered an amusing simpleton, was as usual jumpy and gloomy, who soon went home saying he had smoked too much and had a headache. As soon as he had gone, Martha went up to the bedroom. In the boudoir, on the tripod table by the sofa, a silver box remained open. Dryer took the libitet from it and burst out laughing. "Contractive transmission, animated flexibility. No, he can't be cheating. I think his idea is awfully attractive." When he in turn went up to bed, Martha seemed to be asleep. After several centuries he had elapsed, the bed-table lamp went out. Presently she opened her eyes and listened. He was snoring. She lay on her back, gazing into the dark. Everything irritated her, that snoring, that gleam in the dark, probably in that looking-glass, and incidentally her own self. That was the wrong approach, she thought. Tomorrow night. I'll take drastic measures tomorrow night. Franz, however, did not appear either the next evening or on Saturday. On Friday he had gone to a movie, and on Saturday to a cafe with his colleague, Schwimmer. At the cinema, an actress with a little black heart for lips, and with eyelashes like the spokes of an umbrella, was impersonating a rich heiress, impersonating a poor office girl. The cafe turned out to be dark and dull. Schwimmer kept talking about the goings-ons among boys in summer camps, and a rouged whore with a repulsive gold tooth was looking at them and swinging her leg, half smiling at Franz every time she shook off the ash of her cigarette. It would have been so simple, thought Franz, to grasp her when she touched my knee. Agony! Should I perhaps wait a while and not see her for a few days, and then life was not worth living? The next time I swear, yes, I swear. I swear by my mother and sister. On Sunday his landlord brought him his coffee as usual at 9:30. Franz did not at once dress and shave as he did on weekdays, but merely pulled on his old dressing gown over his pajamas, sat down at the table to write his weekly letter. "Dear Mamma," he wrote in his crawling hand, "how are you? How is Emmy? Probably—" He paused, crossed out the last word, and lapsed into thought, picking his nose, looking at the rainy day on the window. Probably they were on their way to church now. In the afternoon there would be coffee with whipped cream. He imagined his mother's fat, florid face and dyed hair. What did she care about him? She had always loved Emmy more. She had still boxed his ears when he was 17, 18, even 19, last year, in fact. Once at Easter, when he was quite small but already bespectacled, she had ordered him to eat a little chocolate bunny that had been well licked by his sister. For having licked candy meant for him, Emmy received a light slap on the behind, but to him, for having refused to touch the slimy brown horror, she delivered such a backhand whack in the face that he flew off his chair, hit his head against the sideboard, and lost consciousness. His love for his mother was never very deep, but even so, it was his first unhappy love, or rather he regarded her as rough draft of the first love, for although he had craved for her affection because his schoolbooks of stories, My Soldier Boy, Hannah Comes Home, told him, as they had from immemorial time, that mothers always doted upon their sons and daughters, he actually could not stand her physical appearance, mannerisms, and emanations, the depressingly familiar odor of her skin and clothes, the bedbug brown fat birthmark of her neck, the trick she had of scratching him with a knitting needle, the unappetizing part of her chestnut hair, her enormous dropsical ankles, and all the kitchen faces she made by which he could unerringly determine what she was preparing, beer soup or bullhodes, or that dreadful local dainty, Budenzucker. Perhaps, in retrospection at last, he had suffered less from her indifference, meanness, fits of temper, than from the embarrassment and detestation which she pinched his cheek in faint fondness before a guest, usually the next-door butcher, in the latter's presence forced him in a folly and fun to kiss his sister's schoolmate Christina, whom he adored from a distance, and to whom he would have apologized for those dreadful moments when, had she paid the least attention to him, perhaps in spite of everything. His mother missed him now. She never wrote anything about her feelings in her infrequent letters. Still, it was nice to feel sorry for oneself. It brought hot tears to one's eyes. And Emmy, she was a good girl. She would marry the butcher's assistant, best butcher in town. Darn this rain. Dear Mamma, what else? Maybe a description of the room? He replaced his right slipper, which had aged more quickly than the left one and kept falling off his foot when he dangled it and looked around. As I already wrote you, I have an excellent room, but I never described it to you properly. It has a mirror and a washstand. Above the bed there is a beautiful picture of a lady in an oriental setting. The wallpaper has brownish flowers. In front of me against the wall there is a chest of drawers. At that moment there came a light knock. Franz turned his head, and the door opened a crack. Old Enrich thrust his head in, winked, disappeared, and said to somebody on the other side of the door, "Yes, he is at home. Go on right in." She was wearing her beautiful moleskin coat, thrown open over a veily, vapory dress. The rain that had caught her between taxi and entrance had had time to dot with dark stains her pearl-gray helmet-like hat. She stood pressing closely together her legs in apricot silk, as if on parade. Still standing thus, she reached behind her and closed the door. She took off her gloves. Intently, unsmilingly, she stared at Franz as if she had not expected to see him. He covered his bare Adam's apple with his hand and uttered a long sentence, but noticed with surprise that seemingly no words had been produced, as if he had tapped them out on a typewriter, in which he had forgotten to insert a ribbon. "Excuse me for bursting in like this," said Martha, "but I was afraid you might be ill." Palpitating and blinking, his lower lip drooping, Franz began helping her get rid of her coat. The silk lining was crimson as lips and flayed animals and smelled of heaven. He placed her coat and hat on the bed, and one last staunch little observer in the storm of his consciousness, after the rest of his thoughts had scattered, noted that this was like a train passenger marking the seat he is about to occupy. The room was damp, and Martha, who was not much under the dress besides her gartered stockings, shivered. "What's the matter?" she said. "I thought you would be glad to see me, and you don't say a word." "Oh, I'm talking," answered Franz, doing his best to outshut the hum around him. Now they were standing face to face in the middle of the room, between the unfinished letter and the unmade bed. "I don't care much for your dressing gown," she said, "but I love your pajamas. What nice stuff," she continued, rubbing it between her finger and thumb, near his open throat. "Look, he sleeps with his pen in his breast pocket. The perfect little businessman." He began with her hands, burying his mouth in their warm palms. Fondling her cold knuckles, kissing her bracelet, she gently plucked off his glasses, and as if blind herself, groped for his dressing-gown pockets, maddening him in the process. Her face was now sufficiently close to his, and sufficiently removed from the invisible world for his next step. Holding her by the hips, he fed on her half-opened, active mouth. She freed herself, fearing that his young impatience might resolve itself too soon. He nuzzled her in her deep, soft neck. "Please," he murmured, "please, I implore you." "Silly," she said. "Why, of course, but you have to lock the door first." He made for the door, automatically resuming his glasses and leaving in front of her, on the floor, his right slipper in token of his speedy return. Then, his desire exposed and his eyes wicked behind their strong lenses, he attempted to push her toward the bed. Wait a moment, my sweet," she said, holding him with one cold hand and frantically fumbling in her bag with the other. "Look, you must put this on. I'll do it for you, you awkward, brutal darling." "Now," she cried, leaves magnificently sheathed, and baring her thighs and not bothering to lie down and reveling in his ineptitude, she directed hers upward thrusts until they drove home, whereupon, her face working, she threw her head back and dug her 10 nails in his nates. As soon as it was over, Martha staggered and sat down hard on the edge of the bed against which she had been standing. Everything had been so wonderful that she did not immediately become aware of her second-best bag of imitation crocodile under her. Franz wanted to continue at once, but she said that first of all she must take off her dress and stockings and make herself comfy in bed. The coat and hat were transferred to a chair. What Martha called uranaki was rinsed and slipped on again. Franz and Martha admired each other. Her breasts were disappointingly small but charmingly shaped. "I never thought you'd be so lean and hairy," she said, stroking him. His vocabulary was even more primitive. Presently the bed stirred into motion. It glided off on its own journey, creaking discreetly as does a sleeping car when the express pulls out of the dreamy station. You, uttered Martha, softly squeezing him between her knees at every gasp, and following with moist eyes the shadows of angels waving their handkerchiefs on the ceiling, which was moving away faster and faster. Now the room was empty. Objects lay, stood, sat, hung in their carefree postures man-made things adopt in man's absence. The mock crocodile lay on the floor, a blue-tinted cork which had been recently removed from a small ink bottle when a fountain pen had to be refilled, hesitated for an instant, then rolled in a semicircle to the edge of the oilcloth-covered table, hesitated again, and jumped off. With the help of the lashing rain, the wind tried to open the window but failed. In the rickety wardrobe, a blue-black spotted tie slithered off its twig like a snake. A paperback novelette on the chest of drawers left open at chapter 5 skipped several pages. Suddenly, the looking-glass made a signal, a warning gleam. It reflected a bluish armpit and a lovely bare arm. The arm stretched and fell back, lifeless. Slowly, the bed returned to Berlin from Eden. It was greeted by a blast of music from the radio upstairs, which changed immediately to excited speech, which in its turn was replaced by the same music, but now more remote. Martha lay with closed eyes, but her smile formed 2 sickle shapes and dimples at the sides of her tightly closed mouth. The once impenetrable black strands were now thrown back from her temples, and Franz, as he lay beside her, leaning on his elbow, gazed at her tender naked ear and her limpid forehead, and at last found again in his face that Madonna-like something which, prone as he was to content himself with such comparison, he had already noted 3 months ago. "Franz," said Martha, without opening her eyes. "Franz, it was paradise. I've never," she left an hour later, promising her poor pet that next time she would take less cruel precautions. Before going, she thoroughly studied every corner of the room, picked up Franz's pajamas, took out the fountain pen from its pocket and put it on the bed table, changed the position of the chair, observed the socks that were torn and buttons missing, and said that a general fixing up was in order for the room, embroidered doilies perhaps, and definitely a couch with 2 or 3 gay cushions. About that couch she reminded the landlord, whom she found very quietly walking up and down the corridor, evidently waiting for a chance to sweep the room and collect the coffee things. Smiling now at her, now at Franz, rubbing his rustling palms, he said that as soon as his wife returned, the couch would also return, since, in all truthfulness, he had not taken any couch to be repaired. The vacant place had been occupied by a previous tenant's upright piano. He took great pleasure in answering Martha's precise questions. He was quite content with his life in general. Grey old Enric and his felt house shoes with buckles, especially since the day he discovered that he had the remarkable gift of transforming himself into all kinds of creatures, a horse, a dog, or a 6-year-old girl in a sailor cap. For actually, but this of course was a secret, he was the famed illusionist and conjurer, Menetek el Farson. Martha liked his courteous ways, but Franz warned her that he was a little odd. "Oh, my darling," she said on the way downstairs, "this could not be better. This quiet old man is so much safer than would have been a nosy old crony. Au revoir, my treasure. You may give me a kiss, a quick one." His street was decidedly dingy. Perhaps when that Cinna Palace was finished, it would look better. A special poster in a wooden frame, facing the sidewalk on a strategic point, depicted an illusory future. A soaring edifice of glittering glass, which stood aloof on a spacious area of blue air, although actually ugly tenement houses snuggled up to its very slowly rising walls. Scaffolded, half-finished stories above the promised cinema were to contain an exhibition hall for rent, a beauty salon, a photographic atelier, many other attractions. In one direction the street terminated in a dead end, and in the other it ran into a small square where a modest open-air market was set up on Tuesdays and Fridays. From there 2 streets branched out. To the left, a crooked alley which used to flaunt red flags on the days of political celebration, and on the right, a long, populous street. One noticed there a large store where every article cost a quarter, be it a bust of Schiller or a kitchen pan. She was cold but happy. The street abutted on a stone portico with a white U on a blue glass, a subway station. Then one turned left onto a rather nice boulevard. Then the houses stopped. Here and there a villa was being built, or a wasteland was partitioned into small vegetable gardens. Then came houses again, big new ones, pink and pistachio. Martha turned past the last of these and was on her street. Beyond her villa there was a large avenue, serviced by 2 trams, number 113 and 108, and 1 bus. She passed quickly along the gravel path leading to the porch. At that instant the sun swept across the soft underbelly of the white sky and found a slit, and radiantly burst through. The small trees along the path responded immediately with all their moist droplets of light. The lawn scintillated by in turn. A sparrow's crystal wing flashed as it flew by. When Martha entered the house, pink optical models drifted before her eyes in the comparative darkness of the front hall. In the dining room, the table was not yet laid. In the bedroom, the sun was already carefully folded on the carpet and the blue couch. She proceeded to change, smiling, sighing happily, acknowledging with thanks her reflection in the mirror. A little while later, as she stood in the center of the bedroom in a garnet red dress, with smooth temples and just a touch of makeup, she heard Tom's idiotically lyrical bark downstairs, and followed by a stranger's loud voice. On her way at the turn of the staircase, she met the ascending stranger, who passed swiftly, whistling and tapping the banisters with his riding crop. "Hello, my love," he said without stopping. "I'll be down in 10 minutes." And taking the last 2 or 3 steps in one ponderous stride, he grunted cheerfully and cast a downward glance at her retreating bandeau. "Hurry up," she said, and not looking back, "and please get rid of that horsey smell." At lunch, in the midst of a small talk and tinkle, that particular tinkle, half glass, half metal, peculiar to the process of human feeding, Martha did not recognize the master of the house with his mobile cropped mustache and his way of rapidly tossing into his mouth now a radish, now a bit of roll he kept kneading on the tablecloth as he talked. Not that she expected any special constraint. She was no Emma, no Anna. In the course of her conjugal life she had grown accustomed to grant her favors to her wealthy protector with such skill, such calculation, such efficient habits of physical practice that she, who thought herself ripe for adultery, had long grown ready for harlotry. On her right sat a somewhat coarse-looking old man with a glamorous title On her left there was a plump Willie Wald, with big red cheeks and 3 even folds of fat over the back of his collar. Next to him sat his noisy mother, also corpulent, with the same prominent dark moist eyes. Her rasping voice kept abruptly passing into rich gurgling laughter, so different from her speech that a blind man might mistake her for 2 different people. Next to the old count sparkled young Miss Wald, who was powdered to a death-like pallor and unnaturally arching eyebrows, and could keep her 3 gigolos as far as we were concerned. And between them, opposite Martha, concealed now by a fleshy dahlia, now by crystal facets, there sat talking and laughing a completely superfluous Mr. Dyer. Everything except him was fine, the food, especially the goose, and the heavy profile of bald, kindly Willie, and the conversation about cars, and the wit of the Count, and the anecdote about the skin-lifting operation of an aging star, after which her skin was adorned with a new dimple that had been formerly her navel, which he communicated to her sotto voce. She did not talk much herself, but her silence was so vibrant, so responsive, with such an animated smile on her half-open, glistening lips, that she seemed unusually talkative. Dyer could not help admiring from behind the fat pink corners of the dahlias, and the sensation that she was, after all, happy with him made him almost condone the unfrequency of their caresses. "How can one love a man whose mere touch makes one feel sick?" she confessed to Franz at one of their next meetings. When he began insisting she tell him if she loved her husband. "Then I'm the first?" he asked eagerly. "The first?" In answer she bared her shining teeth and slowly pinched her cheek. Franz clasped her legs and looked up to her, rolling his head as he tried to catch her fingers in his mouth. She was sitting in the armchair, already dressed and ready to leave, but unable to make herself go, and huddled on his knees before her, tousled and blinking glasses and his new white braces. He had just put on her street shoes for her, for while visiting him she would wear bed slippers with crimson pompons. This pair of slippers, his modest but considerate gift, our lovers kept in the lower drawer of the corner chest, for life not unfrequently imitates the French novelists. That drawer contained, moreover, a little arsenal of contraceptive implementa, gradually accumulated by Martha, who, after a miscarriage in the first year of her marriage, had developed a morbid fear of pregnancy. As he put the pretty slippers away till next time, he thought what a glamorous feminine touch all this added to the room, which had grown more attractive in other ways too. On the table 3 pink dahlias were on their last legs in a dark blue vase with a single oblong reflection. Lacy doilies had appeared here and there, and soon the tenaciously anticipated couch was to move in weightily. Martha had already acquired 2 peacock cushions for it. In a container a celluloid of round cake of violet-scented beige soap adorned the washstand for Martha's use. The young man's own toiletry had been supplemented by a bottle of anticaprine and skin lotion with a spotted face on the label. All his things had been checked and counted. His underwear bore lovingly sewn on monograms. One unforgettable morning she glided into the emporium, demanded to be shown the most elegant ties available, and chose 3 of them and vanished with them, passing through his department and drowning alternately in the many mirrors, and the fact that she had not even glanced at him added a strange sparkle to that crystal tryst. They now hung in the wardrobe like trophies, and there was a slowly ripening, intoxicating project, a tuxedo. Love helped Franz to mature. This first affair resembled a diploma of which one could be proud. All day he was tormented by the desire to show his diploma to his fellow salesman, but prudence restrained him from even hinting at it. Around 5:30, Pifke, thinking this would please the boss, would let him go a little earlier than the others. He would come tearing breathlessly into the room. Soon Martha arrived with a couple of sandwiches from the neighboring delicatessen. The rather droll but endearing contrast between his thin body and one cocked part of it, shortish but exceptionally thick, would cause his mistress to croon in praise of his manhood. "Fatty is greedy, oh greedy," or she might say, "I bet," she adored bets. "I bet you a new sweater that you can't do it again." But this time is no friend of Oliver's. A little past 7 she had to leave. She was as punctual as she was passionate, and around 9 Franz would generally go and have supper at Uncle's. Warmly flowing happiness filled physical Franz to the brim, pulsated in wrist and temple, pounded in his breast, and issued from his finger in a ruby drop. When he pricked himself accidentally at the store, he frequently had to deal with pins at his department, though not as much as the adjusting tailor, Cotman, who resembled the cart-whiskers fish found in the remote river at abolished boyhood, when with bristling mouth he circled around a chalk-marked customer. But on the whole his hands had now grown more nimble, and he no longer had trouble with the light lids and tissue paper or flat cardboard boxes as he had during the first few weeks. Those rapid behind-the-counter exercises had as it were prepared his hands for other motions and contact, also rapid and nimble, causing Martha to purr with pleasure, for she particularly loved his forelimbs, and loved them most of all. With a succession of rhapsodic touches they would run all over her milk-white body. Thus the shop counter was the mute keyboard on which Franz had rehearsed his happiness. But as soon as she had gone, as soon as the supper hour approached and as he had to face Dryer, everything changed. As happens in dreams when a perfectly harmless object inspires us with fear and thereafter is frightening every time we dream of it, and even in real life